Hello, and welcome to the foundation of the National Lipid Association's podcast, The Lipid Lens. And I'm your host, Dr. Marlys Koschinsky. And the purpose of our podcast is to bring lipid health into focus, one conversation at a time. So we hope you've had a chance to join us before as we're releasing more episodes. But if you're new, that's great too. And thank you for joining us. So our goal is to create a community where people affected by lipid disorders, whether it be patients, families, or caregivers, can access trusted information and share personal stories that inspire and support and give hope to others. So whether you're a clinician, a researcher, or a patient trying to make sense of your own lab results, your own condition, or just someone who's curious about what's really going on inside your arteries, you found the right place. This show is for you. So this month, we're continuing our conversation on the topic of adults living with FCS and what they wish their caregivers would have known. And this series really allows patients, real patients, to share their experiences with us in hopes of educating others. And like I say, giving hope to others too, which includes other individuals, of course, living with FCS, as well as their families, and even the healthcare team who cares for them along their journey. So today's guest I'm thrilled to introduce is Scott Reavis. Scott is a person living with FCS and will speak on behalf of himself and his caregiver, his wonderful wife. So today we're going to discuss with Scott their real life experiences, honest moments, what their challenges have been, have there been surprises, and just sharing with us a bit about what life with FCS has truly been like. So with all that said, welcome, and we are thrilled to have you here today. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott for a greeting and an introduction, a little more than I provided, and then we'll begin our discussion. Over to you, Scott.
Thank you for having me today. It's a wonderful opportunity to share what living with FCS is like. And I live in North Carolina with my wife and 3 children, older boys, all 3 boys. So we have quite the busyness going on in our life on top of living with FCS. So I own a handyman property management business, and my wife and I also own a preschool, and we are starting a kindergarten through 8th grade school, which is where I'm am today. And so it's we are quite the busy folks, and so I'm grateful to have this opportunity to sit with you today.
Wonderful. So, yes, you sound very busy, but that's really great. Sounds all very exciting. So, why don't we just start, Scott, if you could share with us about your diagnosis, when you were diagnosed, and what that entailed, how you felt about your interactions with your healthcare provider, and sort of what your initial reactions were when you found out what was bothering you, what was causing you discomfort and not feeling well.
So I started when I was 10 years old, knowing that I had high cholesterol, and my pediatrician, what they just said was, we'll keep an eye on it. We'll keep an eye on it. Well, they never did. And so when I got to college and started really kind of noticing some things that weren't quite right, not just from having high cholesterol or whatever, but just not being right. And in college, we all know I was raised in a very strict Southern Bible Belt home. And when I got to school, I did what a lot of students do in school, is that I partake in alcohol and had a good time at it and had fun. Well, that's when things really went south. And just really started not feeling well at all. Still didn't know what it was. Went to the doctor and um, with stomach pain and just dealing with it because that's what we do. Um, and plowing through it is kind of my term that we refer to a pancreatitis flare up is just continuing on. I really do wonder what my grades would have looked like in college had I known a little bit more of what was going on. But anyway, just kind of got through college. I did graduate on time and got uh, was still just not feeling well, going through a bunch of tests, and they're coming back and saying this and that, but nothing really changed. Um, and then I got married, and then things started kind of really hitting the fan. So I went through this misdiagnosis and not knowing what was going on for about 25 years. And my first pancreatitis flare up was when my youngest son had just come home from the hospital. My wife was dealing with two young boys and then an infant son. And here I go into my first pancreatitis flare up. And so still didn't know what was going on. Went to the hospital with excruciating pain, and they were just like, well, your triglycerides are really high. How much have you been drinking? And I don't drink. I never have that since college. And so I said, I don't drink. Okay. There's no reason why your triglycerides should be this high if you really aren't drinking. And then they came in, and if I remember right, they still didn't know what was going on, didn't know how to treat me because my triglycerides were so high, and it didn't know what to do. And nurse came in after all the doctors had left, and my wife, I think my parents were actually there, and they had left and said, really, Mr. Reavis, you can tell me, how many drinks of alcohol are you having a day? I said, ma'am, I don't drink an ounce of alcohol, period, since college. And she kind of shook her head like, yeah, right. There's really, yeah, you're still lying to me. And that was the first abuse, as I call it, of them trying to portray me as an alcoholic. And there were multiple times to where that happened again and again and again. And we have actually asked nurses and doctors, not during that visit, but subsequent visits with pancreatitis, that they weren't welcome to come into my room anymore if they were going to accuse me of being an alcoholic. Because I will tell you, even at church, if they serve real wine for communion, I don't partake in communion. That's how little alcohol that I partake in. So about 2 years ago, after searching on the internet and just searching, why is my blood white? Why are my triglycerides so high? Why do I have pancreatitis time after time after time? FCS came up in a Google search. Well, I went down the rabbit hole, and I actually printed off a bunch of documents, and I actually found FH Europe organization. And so I contacted Europe, and I said, I need some help. I think I may. And they put me in contact with the FCS Foundation. Well, I printed off some more documents, and I took a ream of paper to my endocrinologist and said, hey, I think this might be kind of maybe possibly what I have. What do you think? Well, she took it and read it and came back to me a couple months later and said, I think you might be on to something. I still didn't have a diagnosis, but she was at least willing to say, I think you might be on to something. And so that started a process for me of a weight being lifted off of my shoulders, knowing that it was not something totally 100% that Scott did to himself, which is, I had been told multiple times, you're doing this to yourself. You're doing this. So stop. It's going to kill you. So stop. but to have a name, it just lifted a burden off of me to know that there was actually something wrong, not that something wasn't quite right inside of my body that was causing me to have all of these health issues. It was very relieving to me. And then I went to my first FCS conference and realized that had been by myself on this little deserted island uh, of being not well, to all of a sudden knowing other people that had the same experience. I tell you, I haven't cried that much at on a weekend in a long time after meeting all of those people. It was so relieving to know that there are other people in this country that are going through the same type of things that I've gone through. My wife has, as my caregiver, has gone through as well. I had already come to the conclusion that I was never going to grow old and be this sick. And I met a gentleman by the name of Fred, and he was 75 and had grandkids and was successful. And I was like, you know what? After meeting Fred, I can grow old. And that gave me the hope that I needed. And that gave me the spur to do what I do today and just share my story with anyone who will listen.
That's really wonderful. But I have to say, Scott, this is not an unfamiliar sort of trajectory of things. There was, many people I've talked to um, went for years without a diagnosis of FCS. And, you know, um, there was often implications in their, journey of, substance abuse and how hurtful that was. And, it's unfortunate, but, I applaud you for accepting what's, the past is the past and doing so well to continue, you know, on the journey, but at least knowing what you have. But, it must have been very frustrating. I really I feel badly that you experienced that. And I mean, I guess the question is now, what about family members? So your sons, are your sons being checked and followed? Because there is a genetic component, as we know. And so, is that something that now their medical teams are on top of?
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am. My kids hate me because I line them up, and all three of them, and two of them are grown adult men, and 21 and 20 or 19. And I line them up, and we all go get a needle in our arm and get our blood work done all at the same time. And they just roll their eyes. And
Of course,
then
they
I
do.
said, look, we're going to go get it done, or I'm going to get your Nana after you and she'll take you to go get it done.
Well, that's great. That's in a way, that's really a gift that you can give them is they're going to be aware. That's absolutely great that, it's on their radar, it's on their caregivers' radars. And, um, this is very important because your story is not unusual as much as it pains me to say so that, you go for so long without a diagnosis and all sorts of accusations about alcohol abuse and so on are often, you know, either implied or there's an undercurrent of it or just a direct accusation. And it's very hurtful, I find, for patients as I've talked to, a number of people over the years. It is very hurtful. But, it seems like you've kind of turned a difficult situation, maybe not the optimal situation to be in, but into something positive. Like you're here today, you're talking with us, you're sharing your story. It helps. It really helps people that people like you are willing to do that. It's just much, much appreciated. So, in terms of other aspects of your life, how has living with FCS impacted, you know, your life in other ways?
People ask all the time, how often do you think of FCS? And my answer to that is I never stop thinking about FCS, because everything I do, every piece of candy, every snack, I have to account for, even white meat chicken breast. I have to account for, because later on in the day, if we go out to eat, well, then I have to make arrangements of, okay, what can I eat here? How do I need to adjust my diet because of what I ate? Maybe an egg. Well, that's 5 grams of my 10, or 3 of my 10, depending on if I eat the yolk. If I don't eat the yolk, or if I just do egg whites, then, it's considered fat free. So I don't have to, but those are the type of considerations that I have to do all the time. And I'm a snacker. Every time I walk by the refrigerator, I have to resist the temptation to reach in and get something. Well, part of that change of philosophy of being a snacker is that now I make sure that I have things that are acceptable for my diet in our refrigerator at all times. I reach in and I get a handful of grapes. And so that's part of the change that I've had to switch and to live um, live differently than most anyone else has to live. So I allow 10 grams of fat a day in my diet, which is very limiting, but I've gotten pretty good at it throughout the couple of years that I've been very serious on my diet. I've dropped 100 pounds just by um, doing 10 grams of fat a day. And so it is just, uh, it's it's a daily challenge to continue to do what I know is right. And one thing that I do that's a little bit different than a lot of my other FCS friends is that I actually go to a a drug and alcohol rehab program. 2 nights a week, we have meetings. And just as crack cocaine kills the crack addict, or meth or alcohol kills the alcoholic, food is my drug of choice. And I work the 12-step program, as if my drug of choice is food, and which kills me the same way as illegal drugs do. And so that's my philosophy of how I kind of deal outside of the box ways of having additional accountability partners, other than my wife as my caregiver. She gets really exhausted asking me, Scott, you know, are you eating that just because you're grazing, or are you eating it because you're hungry and need nutrition? But now I have a whole group of accountability partners that text me all the time. Hey, what'd you eat today? How are you feeling? Are you doing what you're supposed to do? Are you staying out of the hospital? And now my wife, that's pulled some of that accountability off my wife's plate so that she can be just a wife.
That's great. So, I'm sure it's been a journey for your entire family, just operating as a unit. There's birthdays, there's parties, there's celebrations, and I'm sure that it's affected, your day to day life in numerous, countless ways. But what types of things, I guess what I'm getting at, without, you know, trying to be too personal, is, what kind of supports do you feel were in place readily for family if they needed them? Because there's the patient, and then of course there's the family unit. Were they able to access the kind of support if they needed it? Were they able to get it? I guess that's what I'm trying to ask.
So I would I would say for me as the patient, yes, I was able to get it. My wife, as the caregiver and that support, we got it from our FCS friends and our FCS people that we met at the caregivers, patient caregivers summit that the FCS Foundation puts on. But as far as specific support, either through counseling or through um, just support, I don't think that was readily available when we needed it. Um, I mean, there were times where I needed my wife at the hospital with me because the doctors weren't listening and accusing me of being an alcoholic and just seeking drugs, pain medication. Um, and I needed her there, and I wasn't getting treated because they weren't listening. But our three boys were home and needed mom worse than I needed the help at the hospital. So I knew that I would eventually get what I needed, but I knew that the boys were more important, to get that they got what they needed as they were growing up. So um, no, I don't think that was offered, and I don't think that was readily available. And that's one reason why, um, m- I hate to say this, and I don't want to speak on behalf of my wife, but why she's not here with me. Um, she There has been so much trauma around me and around her being my caregiver that some of those things and that trauma have started to heal. And for her to sit through this and have to rip that Band-Aid off again is traumatizing and bringing that trauma back. And she didn't want to risk going through that trauma again. So I'm doing it. I'm sharing our trauma, and I'm sharing and trying to give hope to anyone who will listen, that we're here to support you. All you have to do is reach out to us. There are people that I will give my phone number. I don't care. I'll put my phone number out there. I'm a property manager. There's many people that I wish didn't have my phone number that have it. But I will share my phone number, and I will be that support. I will be that person that if your caregiver can't be there to support, or for whatever reason you need additional support, then I will provide that. And that's what we needed. We needed someone to come alongside of us when I was laid up in the hospital, just to help my wife take care of our boys, and just to make sure that they had clean clothes, and I mean, nothing extravagant, but that we are providing that for other people within our community, within our FCS community, but also in our church community, in our circle of influence that we have. Is just when a need arises, we are quick to jump in because we know what it's like to need that support and to not have it.
Right. Right. Yeah, I can see where that would be very challenging. But it sounds like, you certainly considered that, and you know, a lot of people wouldn't, necessarily, they'd want the wife there, but you were willing to sort of say, we've got three sons, and I think these are personal decisions on how people manage these situations, but at the end of the day, I'm sure that was what worked best for your family. And I certainly am fully understanding of her not wanting to, as you say, have the band-aid ripped off in this kind of a interview, sort of, well, call it a discussion situation. I that's the last thing that we would want to do. So, but at the same time, I'm very appreciative that you are willing to share your story, because there's so many people out there who, really listening to this would benefit from learning a lot of the things just from the medical side, as well as just from life and the impact on life and family life and so on. And so that's why I think, we can read about all this stuff in books, but we can't, you know, the only way to learn, in my view, about people's experiences is to hear them from the person and how you've coped, how you've managed. And that's an important part of, obviously, of having a disease is, how how you manage your family, how you manage you know, your social life, how you manage, to keep yourself from sinking into despair. But it sounds like, you're busy and you're doing things. And so I applaud you for being so brave to do all that and keep going and put your family, as a priority in kind of managing the whole situation. That's really, really great. I mean, everybody does things differently but that was what was right for you and your family. So, yeah, I'm glad
Thank
to
you.
hear that that worked out.
Yeah, and I will say that what's best for me and my family may not be what's best for you and your family. I hope that maybe during this conversation that the people that are listening will pick out one thing that they can include into their family. And I remember there was a couple after I got my formal diagnosis, and we sat my boys down and we talked to them about it, and finally was able to share with them what this really meant. And one of my sons said, "Now I understand why you just couldn't do things that you wanted to do sometimes." And it was an eye opener for them that daddy wasn't just being a jerk that didn't want to participate in things. It was just that I couldn't. And so now my oldest son and my youngest son work for me. If I say, "Hey, I just can't today," they understand and they pick up the pieces and they move forward, and and they know what to do even if dad's not there, because I can't. I will show up when I can and when I'm able to, but now they understand that, it's not just dad wanting to be lazy or wanting to stay in bed all day. And that was a really eye opener for my boys.
Well, I'm sure. But just sounds like, as I say, every situation is different. And I think, you found a way to make this work for you and to make it work for your family, which is fabulous. That's really a good ending to what, is not the best news to ever receive in your life, that you have something like this. Because I can only imagine the challenges just on a day-to-day basis, like you were saying, with food and, having you know, looking at something and saying, I really want to eat that, but that's it for me for the day. That's my 10 grams. I mean, it's hard, it's always hard to imagine that level of restriction. But again, you know, being healthy for yourself and managing and being healthy for your family is very important too. So, but at the same time, I think I could only imagine the challenges on a day-to-day basis of managing this. But I think, the other thing that really disappoints me a lot about, and when I first heard this, I just thought, well, surely this was a one-off thing that, people wouldn't, have the reaction of being in the hospital for alcohol abuse and or seeking pain, you know, drugs for pain, but this is a common story that I've heard many times. And I think it kind of I feel a little pang in my heart every time I hear it, because that's sad. And, again, I think, it's hard probably not to feel a bit bitter about that. But at the same time, I think you're the kind of person who's not taken that road, who's taken the higher ground on these things. But it is, it must have been very hurtful for you. because, that wasn't the issue. You knew it, but you weren't being listened to. You weren't being heard. And I think that really, like I say, it kind of twinges at my heart a little bit every time I hear someone. But again, I didn't realize that was kind of a theme. So many people with FCS and their first, number one, the difficulty in diagnosing it. I don't think I've heard one story from anyone that I've ever talked to about this who said, yeah, I wasn't well and I went in and I had some tests and guess what? I had FCS. No, no, it wasn't like that. It was a long process of, these attacks, hospitalizations, false accusations, and, it took so long to get a diagnosis. And I think, you know, when you've been through that, having a diagnosis would almost be, a breath of fresh air. And, you know, because it must be very hard to, have something, there's something wrong. You don't know what it is, but it's not self inflicted. So, yeah, I was surprised to hear that's really a recurring theme. But
Yeah.
again, it
It is
sounds like
sad.
you've
It is
handled
sad
that
because it
very
doesn't have to
well.
be
It
that way.
is very sad. No, no, it doesn't. But, I think, again, FCS is maybe something that people aren't as familiar with, depending on their experience, their background, their practices. But, it's just, it's thank God is all I can say that you actually, you were able to get a diagnosis and start on the path of recovering your physical health as well as your, you know, emotional well-being and being able to, you know, support your family and emotionally and all. And, so getting the diagnosis is key and it seems like that's not totally straightforward. Um, Again, it's something I've
No,
heard a number
it's
of
not.
times. So I think it's no, it doesn't seem to be. So, again, I think, I don't know if you've had a chance to visit our website, the Foundation of the National Lipid Association, and look at our materials that we have. And again, I think a lot of our materials are, very much patient facing because I think the more people know, the more that they can be informed about these things that are maybe less common, but, they happen. People get FCS. And also just the understanding of the genetic component and, again, sort of what needs to be done for children and, just to make sure that, the same thing doesn't happen for them where they go through not being diagnosed, in a relatively timely manner and suffer a lot and so on. So I think, our resources, I'm very proud of what we've put together and I think our website is very helpful, and I think it very much, is meant to be patient facing, but also, a resource for clinicians as well. So thank you for looking at it. And if you ever have any input on our website, if there's things, that you wish would have been there, you wish you would have seen, I'd love to hear it. Like
Sure.
we're always looking to improve our materials and make sure that they're as relevant and, comprehensive and complete as possible. So, yeah, because it sounds like, you've really reached out and that's part of your strategy, I think, that I've heard in the last,
Yes.
30 minutes is you are the kind of person who reaches out, gets the help they need, goes on websites, finds, sources of, information. But, again, we always have to make sure that that material is as accessible, as possible. So
Right.
any patient perspective on that is always welcome. Feedback is great.
One of the things
So,
that people always ask me is, Scott, what do you hope for in the future? And what do you hope for people with FCS that the next thing coming down the pipeline? Well, we've got some treatments that have come down the pipeline, so I guess my thoughts have changed. Um, Now, what I would like to see is a protocol for emergency room doctors who see patients coming into the emergency department with triglycerides over 2,000 with pancreatitis to have their triglycerides checked immediately instead of, sorry, we don't do that in the ER. And there were multiple times where I had to fight the doctor to get that blood test done. I'm not an alcoholic. I do have pancreatitis. Well, we can't check your triglycerides in the ER. Well, I need you to. That's going to determine. And multiple times my triglycerides came back over 8,000 when they finally agreed to, and I talked them into it, and finally they agreed. So I would love to see some sort of protocol for emergency rooms that with pancreatitis and non-alcoholic pancreatitis for triglycerides to be run on, because they're already taking the blood. They're already taking multiple vials of blood.
Yeah, that is the way it's diagnosed, like initially, at least anyway, is that severe
Right.
elevation, uh, triglycerides. So that's interesting. That's an interesting perspective, and thank you for sharing that. Uh, because yeah, I guess when you think about it, I mean, otherwise there's unfortunately too many other causes of pancreatitis that I'm sure they encounter, and yours obviously was not one of those causes. But I mean, getting a diagnosis is everything, right? For patients, for families. I mean, there's no way to start healing until you know what's wrong with you. So, you know, the quicker that can happen, the better. So I appreciate that comment. I'll discuss it a little bit more with my friends and see what we can do you know, to encourage, that. Um, so anyway, is there anything that you would like to share as a parting message to anybody listening, be they caregivers or patients themselves, children, relatives of patients who are suffering with FCS? Is there any message you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
My message is don't lose hope. It can seem sometimes on a deserted island that you're there by yourself. You're not. Just know that we are on that island with you. We may be on the other side of the island, but we are on the island with you. And we just have to find each other. And I encourage you to search us out. You will find us. I promise. You will find us. And I want you to know as well that therapy has done wonders for me. I found a therapist that also has a chronic illness, so she understands the sickness side of having this FCS. And so I see her as part of my treatment every other week, because I just need to run things by her of things that I'm feeling, the grief that I have with dealing with food and can't eat the same food as my friends eat, and having to deal with those awkward social environments, and to create strategies on how to navigate life has been tremendous for me. And I would encourage you to find someone, a therapist, a pastor, not necessarily a friend. They need to have that expertise that can really guide you, and to have um, a centered conversation, not what not that they're going to tell you what you want to hear just because they're your friend or too nice. Sometimes you need to know and have your, I don't know how else to say it, but have your chain jerked a little bit, and to know that you can do this, that you're feeling sorry for yourself. It's okay to feel sorry for yourself for about 30 seconds, And then, okay, now let's come out of it and let's pull through and let's keep moving forward and figure it out and be solution driven. You need someone to help you to do that. And I would encourage you to seek out therapy, a therapist, a counselor, or someone that can help you do that. It's always good to
Hmm.
have someone that doesn't have a dog in the hunt to help listen and put a fresh set of eyes on your situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Scott. I really, really appreciate your time with us today, your candid discussion and conversation that we've had, and I've really enjoyed hearing about your journey, and I'm sure all the listeners will be also very interested, and even if they're not dealing with FCS, we're talking about dealing more generally with chronic conditions and things like that, but FCS has its own particular frustrations just in terms of it's not just a simple it's medication, yes, but there's also this huge dietary component. And I think everybody knows no matter what culture you're from, food is kind of a center piece of celebrations of, happy times, family times, and that makes FCS somewhat unique in its coping challenges for both the patients and the caregivers, as you very eloquently pointed out. So much appreciated, Scott, and I wish you all the best. And, keep up the good work. And please check out our website. Tell us what you think. Thank you. Take care.